Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm your host, Megan Henry, and joined by my co-host, Jen, today. Hey, Jen.
Hi, nice to be here on this rainy Friday morning.
I know, but we need the rain, right? At least I do. I don't know. I don't know if my lawn agrees. My lawn people haven't come, and I have like a whole lawn of very tall weeds. It looks great. My neighbors love me right now.
Every time we go out to cut the grass, it's raining again. So it's either going to be knee high very soon, or it'll stop raining, and we'll get it looking nice.
Yeah. Well, today I'm super excited. We are joined by Rene Tomlinson, and Rene and I have been talking for some time. It took us a little while to get this on the calendar. We had a few cancellations and rescheduling. But we're finally here. And Rene is coming in. She has so much experience in first-party property claims. And in one of our favorite states, I feel like we talk a lot about on this program, is Florida. And just Florida is just an interesting place to to defend claims and defend litigation. So she has a lot to share about that. She's got many years of experience and a lot to weigh in. So with that, let's bring her in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Megan Henry.
Good morning, Rene. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm so happy to have you. How are you this morning?
I'm just fine, Megan. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. We had this scheduled a while ago, and I had an issue pop up, and it took us a little while to get it back on the calendar, but like all things, good things come to those who wait. So I'm so happy we're able to sit down today. I feel like it was I think I talked to you initially in March. So I feel like we've known each other a long time.
It's been a while. Yes. Yes.
Well, as everyone knows who listens to this program, we like to dive into, all things about claims. But before we get into, the hot points that you and I wanted to talk about, I want to dive into how you got into claims, because everyone's story is so different. Most is a bob and weave and accidental jump into the profession of claims, but I'm curious to see what your path was. So what was your path into claims?
So many years ago in 1999, I joined State Farm at their headquarters in Bloomington, Illinois. And I joined them as an executive assistant. So I was supporting the vice president of claims for State Farm. And then a few years after that is when all the storms and hurricanes hit Florida in 2004. And of course, in claims, as you know, in hurricane season, it's, everybody has to be all hands on deck. And that's what that year ended up being. So I was at the corporate headquarters, but they were also looking for even people such as myself to volunteer to come to Florida and help in any capacity. So I ended up coming to Florida for a couple of weeks at a time and helping set up the temporary offices and points of contact for customers to come. And State Farm, of course, had this all down. They had a lot more experience than I did. So anyway, they made an office in an abandoned mall on the east coast of Florida, about halfway down the coast. And that was one of the hardest hit areas at that point in time. And so I went there and helped them set up a temporary office and get the independent adjusters moving in there and get the assignments out to everyone. And that was just really, it triggered a big interest. And so I did some ride-alongs at that point in time and saw all the devastating damage to everyone. And that's what triggered me. I wanted to get into claims at that point, and I let it be known. And so I relocated to Florida, and here I am.
Oh, wow. Was an executive assistant with State Farm, was that your first job?
When I joined them, I was an executive assistant in marketing, and then I moved over to claims and was the executive assistant to the VP of claims then. So I guess you're in the right place at the right time for a reason. Yes, yes.
Well, you mentioned way back in 1999. In my mind, 1999 was 10 years ago. In 2004 was 5 years ago. So that's what I have going on.
Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
So, and what was it though about that experience that really drew you in? Was it, just the catastrophic nature of it and trying to, decipher and pull it apart? What excited you about it?
I think the catastrophe aspect of it, as well as being able to help people, seeing, like I said, devastating damage to a lot of people. And I remember this older gentleman on one of my ride-alongs, and we were up on the roof and, doing his estimate, and I was visiting with him as the adjuster was, creating the estimate to create. And at that time, they were giving out checks on the spot. They would have a printer in their car and generate an estimate and a check and be able to hand people their check, which was just amazing to me. And so that part of it was what drew me in, I guess. Yes.
And I'm going to digress or sidestep a little bit, but every time you say ride along, I'm just picturing you in a cop car. I just can't picture it any other way.
Yeah, well, it was
just so you know what's going through my head every time you say ride along.
Yeah. It wasn't anything glamorous, I'll put it that way. It was, you're out in the trenches, and I remember them saying, don't access any roofs with blue tarps on them because, you have a danger of falling through, or, it's just too dangerous to access the roof at that point. So, when I say ride along, it was no joke. It was hands-on experience.
Yes. And probably long days, and you probably developed like a really strong relationships with everyone that you're with because you're going through this huge experience together.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that because I remember I went back a couple of times, and I did develop friendships with other State Farm adjusters and some of the independent adjusters as well. And when I did leave for, finally going back to the routine, at hand and going back to Bloomington, Illinois, I got a little blank book for everybody to sign. And I still have that to this day. I just look at it once in a while. Yeah. And they'd say, something about, going out, because we were doing 12-hour days, 6 days a week. So you got to know each other very, very well, spending that much time together.
Yes. So then through this experience, you relocate to Florida, and then you stay at State Farm for quite some time. Like a big chunk of your career was spent there. Did you continue to do the same type of work, or did you pivot to something else?
Well, I had to pivot to make it work, with the company and do what the business need was at the time. So at that time, they were reorganizing and restructuring their subrogation department. So that's, I spoke with my boss at the time and said, you might be sorry that you sent me to Florida because I like it so much. I want to move there. And he said, well, no, that's just fine. And, if you'd like to help them get the subrogation department up and running, then I can offer you relocation. So I took advantage of that, of course, and that's how I ended up in Jacksonville, Florida. State Farm at that time had a regional office down here, and I helped the subrogation department get up and running, and they've since closed that office. The whole operation center is closed now because they did more reorg and built the hubs, and they wanted me to move again. They were asking everyone to think about moving to one of the hubs, and I didn't have it in me at that point. I wanted to stay put. So that's when I ended up leaving State Farm. But while I was there, I got my adjuster's license and started in the catastrophe operations. And then, and I can say there's probably no better company to go through all the claims schooling and the training than State Farm does. At that point, we had to sit through classroom, 4 to 5 weeks of classroom study. Wow. And then they would bring you back to Bloomington to do hands-on, like teaching you the safe way to access a roof. And they had a lab up there that was amazing. They would have different causes of loss, and one might be a vandalism claim. They had a little mock house that you would go in, and you'd be required to create the estimate in the software, and
wow.
and then be graded on the estimate to see if you missed anything, or they might have one that's a flood, one that's a fire, one that's a wind, and tell you, okay, for this type of shingle, if it's a shingle roof, they should be able to withstand, winds up to 70 miles an hour or whatever. Tile roofs, knowing the different types of building materials and things like that. So I went through that, and then I decided I wanted to get the other side, and I went through their auto claim school as well, and learning all the parts of the car and how to adjust that property damage on a car. And then I got into bodily injury claims and into litigation. So that's where I am today, in litigation.
That is so impressive. When I took the adjuster's license exam, I was handed a book, and they're like, here, study this book, and you have 6 months to pass your exam. Like that. And I was handling professional liability, so I knew nothing about any of the other stuff. I passed by 2 points, and I probably shouldn't tell people that, but
it's okay.
It just seems like such an amazing experience to be able to get that hands-on, because then when you're going to answer the questions, it makes sense, right? Like you saw all of it, you got to experience it, to feel it, to touch it. That's impressive.
Yeah, I was impressed with their training at State Farm. I really was. They made sure.
Yeah, I've never heard anything like it.
I haven't either.
Yeah. I wonder if they still do it that way, because what a great hands-on way to learn it, and also it's probably a lot of fun to set up. It's like setting up like a law school fact pattern in real life,
Right. Well, and then I was really impressed with their I don't know if they called it an induction center or what, I can't remember, but when the real storms were hitting and they were running people through there almost like cattle, it seemed like, that's where all the adjusters, independent adjusters that they were contracting on to have boots on the ground in Florida at the site, they would all come through the Jacksonville office to get, and things have evolved a lot since then. So I'm sure they don't do it that way anymore, but that's when we had paper claim files, So, but they would run all the adjusters through that operations center to get their assignment. And if they were staff adjusters, they would give them some supplies that they might need, that kind of thing. But the contracted adjusters, of course, had to bring their own supplies.
Yeah.
But they still had to go through there for whatever reason, maybe to get their assignments or something. It was quite impressive. Yeah.
I am very impressed in the whole training operation. So
Right.
so then you depart, and then you leave State Farm, and you're now handling bodily injury claims.
No, I did while I was at State Farm. I handled bodily
Okay.
injury claims, both litigated and non-litigated for pre-suit.
Okay.
And that was quite an experience. And that was kind of exciting, I thought, to be able to see how those work and, be able to, if somebody is being suspect of fraud, then being able to put a private investigator on them and watch how they walk out of the doctor's office versus 2 hours later when they're trimming their shrubs at home and not in pain.
Yes.
So, and then
those are always the best videos to get, when you have this person who has terrible back injury, they can't do anything, and they're climbing a ladder, cleaning out their gutters, like you said, or on the trampoline, like with their kids. Like.
Right. I'm telling you, it was quite interesting to watch some of those, the feed that some of those investigators would turn in.
Yeah. Are there any ones that stick out in your mind as super memorable?
There are. And this was, back when, Facebook probably was just becoming popular.
Oh, yeah. And you had lots of idiots putting stuff on Facebook. Then.
Oh, yeah. Well, the younger people tend to put everything on Facebook, right? Or whatever they use nowadays. I'm
TikTok.
Not sure. But I did go to a meeting once, and we produced those photos of this young lady dancing on the bar. But she was supposedly, very injured and had a back injury. So that went in our
very Coyote Ugly moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Just to watch her face, Yeah.
I practiced doing plaintiff's work for a very brief time, realized I much prefer to be on this side. But I had a client, and in the deposition, she said she couldn't ride on her lawnmower anymore to cut her grass, and then posted a picture a few weeks later of her riding an ATV around her property. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, public, anybody could see it. That's it. You no longer can now say that you can't do anything because of your back.
Right. So I don't really get it, why people, maybe they just don't think about it, and they're just, out there living life and enjoying things. And hey, that just sunk your case. Well, just goes to show, don't be fraudulent.
Right. Bottom line.
But, Florida is one of the most litigious states I've known of. And most of those lawsuits come from the South Florida counties, like Dade County, Broward County. Those are really heavy litigious areas.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And now I handle property claims that are litigated. So it's first party property. And, the further south in Florida that you go, the more apt you are to, be on your toes and watch for something that doesn't make sense.
And have you noticed it becoming more litigious now compared to, 5-10 years ago, even with the tort reform?
It does affect things a little bit, but it seems like it might slow things down for a while, and then they figure a way around it somehow, it seems. So I don't think those lawsuits are ever going to go away. They might slow down or they might change, but they never, like AOB, assignment of benefits, that was a thing for a while in Florida, and now those aren't so much in existence, but we get directions to pay, which is almost, it's along the same lines. So it's just a matter of who has to be put on the settlement check if it's going to settle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we kind of glossed over this. So you leave State Farm. So what do you do next?
So when I left State Farm, I went to Citizens Property Insurance of Florida, and they are like the insurer of last resort. So when no one else or no private insurer will be able to cover you because you're too close to the coast or whatever reason, then Citizens will pick it up, and they have to. So they were, I believe, formed from legislation. So they're a government entity. And I went there and jumped into, litigated property claims. And they just seemed to boom, like they were this size, and then all of a sudden they were building teams of litigation teams and segmenting them out for, I think they segmented them by cause of loss. So some of them were plumbing leak or slab leak. Others were catastrophe claims. Others were non-catastrophe, but wind or hail and that kind of thing. So, and then that's when we still had AOB. So then they had a whole unit on just AOB claims that the roofer would get the insured to sign, the policyholder just signed away the rights, and then the roofers would sue the carrier. So, and it was usually a roofer and not a general contractor, but
what a mess.
Yeah, it's a hot mess. And there are still a couple of the players, contractors that are still hanging around and finding their way in. Like I said, if they find one little way to get in there, they will. So they really do. They go from neighborhood to neighborhood, and especially after a storm hits, and knock on doors and offer to inspect your roof. And of course they find damage, even if there is none.
I mean, that was happening in New Jersey not so long ago too. I mean, I had people knock on my door, be like, oh, we had a hailstorm, 2 weeks ago, want us to check your roof and your siding for damage. And I remember at the time too, I was actually working at a law firm that we did actually a lot of work for State Farm, and us having this presentation about this fraud that was happening. And they would often go and create the hail damage in the siding. Like they would have a tool and they would knock it in. And I remember someone coming to my door, and I was like, "Nope, not talking to you."
Right.
and they may have been a legit person, I don't know. But after I heard that thing, I was like, "Nope, you're not looking at my roof. You're not looking at my house. I know what you're up to."
Exactly. And they still do call me at, just a few days ago, I had a roofer call me and offered to go up and inspect my roof, and I'm like, "I'm an insurance adjuster. No thanks. Take me off your call list." They hang up real fast then. So
yeah, although now I feel like the racket we get is solar. Like everyone wants to sell me solar, and I'm going to get a new roof for free. But although that means I have to lease out my roof or some nonsense like that.
Yeah,
that's another door slam. Not interested in solar from you. I can get it my own way.
Yes, and that's a source of roof damage. When they install the solar panels, they have to be careful of who you hire, so that and ask them that, what do you do and how do you install it? Because 9 times out of 10 they're going to make an opening in your roof that is going to create a leak, and then there you go. And a lot of times that's not covered because it's considered improper installation or something like that would be denied. And then the people are just instantly upset with their carrier, and thus my job security.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
So when you were working for Citizens, did you find that those claims were like bigger and kind of crazier than what you were seeing at State Farm, since they were sort of an insurer of last resort?
No, I actually thought that they were of less value usually, because it might be somebody that isn't covered by a private insurance carrier for whatever reason. But those were the just the normal, homes, nothing that was too complex or too high dollar, because those folks have the income to go to a private carrier and afford that coverage.
Got it.
Right. So if they're dropped for non-payment, then they go to Citizens.
Got it.
Yes.
I'm picturing these like big multi-million-dollar homes on the beach where somebody doesn't want to cover them because of the risk, but I guess it's the opposite.
Right. Right.
So let's fast forward though. So you now are at more of a newer insurance company, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little about how your move there, and it's a very exciting opportunity, but not without some challenges too. So I definitely want to make sure we have some time to talk about that.
Yeah. So yes, so I do work for a newer carrier, but they're very solid and they're growing at, I guess, just the right pace because they're expanding into multiple different states. And they're even considering, they're working on other products such as going into auto coverage. But I work in the litigation. I'm on the litigation team handling first party property claims that are litigated. And that's kind of ended up through the years. That's just that's where I ended up. And that's kind of my specialty and what I'm good at. I've developed skills and experience at working with the defense counsels and knowing when we need to get an expert on board and things like that. So I'm able to offer the company leadership some insight because I am, one of the ones that had the most litigation experience. So I'm able to offer them some suggestions as to, maybe developing processes and things like that.
Yes. Which, I think you and I had talked about is a challenge when you're coming into a newer carrier compared to like someone like State Farm or something like State Farm that's been around for so long that all the policies and procedures might not be as in place or as ironclad yet, just because it's a newer operation. But the good part about that is you can kind of take what you've learned from your prior experience and kind of cherry pick what works and kind of throw it all together in one and get one system that for you is the best system because you're kind of taking the best pieces of all.
Right. But the challenge to that is, getting it to the right ear and having it go to the right person who might actually value that information and some others might not, so it's a little challenging at times. I have to say that I've trained myself to know when I really need to speak up and say, hey, this is not a tried and true process. You need to maybe think about doing something this way instead of what you're heading down that path. Don't do that. It's going to not be too successful. But for the most part, they're very open-minded and listening to what I have to say, and welcoming to the ideas and the input that I have. So, and I've been able to get some information past them, into the right people, and get good defense firms for this area, lined up and on board. So that's been a good thing.
Yeah, and having worked in that jurisdiction for so long, you definitely have probably trusted counsel that you like to work with, and share your same, philosophy as to how these cases should be handled. And that's something you and I had talked a lot about too, that, you're looking for results, who's not, right? but you and I specifically talked about, like, if you can close a file quickly, that's what you want to do. You don't want to, keep it open. It's something like we kind of like bonded about a little bit, I remember, on the phone.
Right. So if we get something in that is simply a scope and price dispute and it's a covered loss, for goodness sakes, let's get some even just informal negotiations going and try to get that resolved quickly before we incur unnecessary litigation expenses. You don't want to exchange written discovery and go down the deposition path and everything if it's something you're going to settle anyway.
Right.
Those are the ones that I try to get settled within 30 to 60 days. And, if you can. And it kind of all depends on each case on its own merits and how complex it is, and the opposing counsel as well. Some of them file suit, serve the suit, and then ghost you. And that's just so frustrating. It's like, I'm trying to give you money. Answer the phone, Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, some of that's so frustrating though too, because you're like, I want to get this done. I just need these 3 pieces of information for you in order to do my processes, and then I can get you your money. But can you just at least respond to me and get me this information? I'm not trying to mess with you, or I want to get you your money. I just need this in order to do it.
So let's open that line of communication first. If you just talk to us, and it's frustrating from an adjuster standpoint that you're trying to work with your defense counsel. And that's why it's so important to have that good rapport and good working relationship with just the adjuster and the defense counsel, so that you can be a team and move in the right direction, instead of, not having that relationship results in the adjuster trying to do their job and make sure that the litigated claim is handled in a certain way that the carrier wants, and it's almost like you're not on the same team, and you've got to, make a lot of efforts to get even your own counsel to answer the phone. So I spoke up and said, this firm is really good. They're real responsive. They're big enough to handle the volume, and they're in multiple different states. So let's give them a try, if you would. And they did. And now most of my cases are with them. So that's something I can say is really good about the company that I work for. They try to be aware of those preferences and match the adjuster with a defense counsel that, those people work well together.
Yeah.
So that's helpful.
For you, like, what are, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What are some of the qualities that you in particular are looking for in your defense counsel partners?
Someone who is responsive, number one. They'll answer my calls, or they will answer my email.
I'm a little alarmed that you have counsel that doesn't answer your calls or emails.
There's not very many, but
I see a red flag right there.
Yeah. So those that don't last long. if they don't have the bandwidth to, respond to calls and emails, then, they're not going to make it for very long, because we have to have somebody that, and each carrier is a little bit different as to how they handle the lawsuit. So some of the carriers let the adjuster handle it with the defense counsel, and other carriers are more hands-on, and they want to be involved and, be in on an initial suit meeting. So we get served with the suit, and, we have 20 days to respond. So usually it's a motion for extension of time while we get a meeting scheduled. And each carrier is a little bit different as to how many levels of leadership at that carrier is in on that initial meeting. And then usually by 90 days down the road, there's another meeting of some sort, like a roundtable meeting, or, the adjuster and the defense counsel hopefully have either settled it, or it's in negotiations, or it's been determined to be a potential trial candidate or a motion for summary judgment candidate, something like that, so that we know, hey, we don't want to settle this one. We want to take it all the way. So by that 90-day mark, we should have a good idea as to whether we're going to go after depositions, or if we're going to try to get a mediation on the calendar or something.
Yes. And this is something that I actually talked to someone about yesterday. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Is, what are some things that you wish defense counsel asked of you or knew about your behind the scenes process that would make your job easier?
I would say that they get to know their adjuster and know whether they need to have every single motion reviewed and approved before they file it, or if there's certain motions that they can, go for, and just, it's an expectation. You don't have to ask me if you can do a motion for protective order of our corporate rep. I expect that, draft the motion, get it over and say, here, we're ready to file this. And your corporate rep is going to be scheduled, in a month for their deposition. So we need to get this motion filed, that kind of thing. So being a little bit proactive, I guess, and knowing what motions that they should actually get approval to even draft. Like a motion for summary judgment is a pretty big deal, and it can take up some time to get that carved out and drafted. So don't just go.
Don't go do it.
Don't do it and ask for forgiveness later. And nobody has filed it, but there are about a couple that have drafted them without asking. And I'm like, we didn't say to draft that yet, so maybe a good time, but ask.
Yeah, I get it. There's certain motions that are like time constraints on them, in the sense that, you might just need to say, we need to file this. It's, time is of the essence. So, and make sure you let your adjuster know you're filing it. But it might I've always couched those in reports saying, like, we need to file this. I need to file it by X date. Unless you disagree, I'm going to move forward with this.
That's perfect.
So then, because then it puts it on the adjuster to say, no, I don't want you to do it, or they just don't need to respond, and their non-response is agreement.
You're going to file it. And because you got to be on the same team. And I look at my defense counsel as my safety net, so that, they're going to go ahead and file the motion for extension of time if they need to. So we're not going to be a default, right? And that shouldn't be waiting for me to, I might have 200 unread emails because I have so many different counsels and caseload. Caseload is like 85 different lawsuits at one time to manage. So that can bog a person down as far as all the emails coming your way. So
yeah, it is definitely something that I found to be so valuable. Like that I was taught to do those certain things. Like there was times that my mentors or who I was working for didn't kind of explain those things. And at some point I had one mentor that really was like, no, write it like this, because you don't want to give them more work unless you like have to. And I never had never been explained to me that way. And then it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh, like, and I just think some younger attorneys need to understand the claims desk a little bit better in how they're communicating to their adjusters. And Jen's shaking her head because she was at a claims desk.
I handled claims for 8 years, but we actually we train our new associates. So when they come in, there's another attorney at the office and I he handled claims for 25 years, and we do a presentation for the new associates and teach them about claims. And this is what the claims professional does, and this is why they need a report within 60 days. And it goes to the point you said before. Within that 60 days, you know what's happening. Is this going to settle? Is it a motion case or is it going to trial? And this is the strategy to get to the resolution. And you generally know within 60 days, right?
Oh,
and so that's a huge one. And we also tell them about how to communicate with the claims professional, kind of just as you were saying, like to keep them informed on everything. And once you develop that relationship, you know what that particular claims person wants. Right, like what kind of updates do they want? What they're like? How do they handle their cases? So it's a growing and evolving relationship, which is so nice that you said like you have go-to firms. Well, now you know each other. They know what you want. You know what they want. That's all. It helps everything work so seamlessly.
Yes. And I have to say, I prefer my method of urgent communication is just to be able to give them my cell phone number and say, if you have anything that's, on a tight deadline or you need to reach me, please call me. Don't email me, because that's my biggest challenge as an adjuster or a claims professional, even a supervisor, or I've been a litigation manager, is email is just never ending. And it's a challenge to be able to prioritize the emails and know what you need to answer right away, what can wait until evening or the next day, or so if they need me, call my cell phone and let's have a quick discussion. I'd much rather pay for that on a firm's invoice than to have something slip through the cracks and it be my fault that it's late.
Yeah. Although I would never fault the adjuster for that too, because I feel like when an attorney knows that there is a deadline, it is on them to make, and at some point too, you just make the executive decision too. If you're not hearing back, you paper your file and you say, hey, time was of the essence. I had to do this or whatever, but like, you just can't it's on the attorney to make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks.
You're so right. And that's why I say, they're like my safety net. And really anything can be fixed. You can file it and then you can amend it later if there is something that they, that they have to have in there, or different wording or whatever. And the carrier comes into play then. That's, the current one is very hands-on. They have things they want done a certain way. They have made a whole bunch of templates and they expect those to be used. And sometimes it's a little difficult getting that through to the defense firm. To use templates like that.
It does make me happy to hear you say that everything can be fixed, because it all can. I mean, look, do you want mistakes? No, you don't, but they do happen. And very rarely are they like absolutely catastrophic,
Right.
Even down to motions in limine, even if look, you should have all your motions in limine filed by the deadline, but even if they are not, the court typically will allow impromptu motions in limine because things pop up during trial. Things pop up, and I don't like the approach that the sky is falling.
No, I don't either. I always like to, I love to stay on top of everything, but it's inevitable that something's going to slip through at some time on some case. And, you got to have the right attitude. Like, okay, well, we can file an amended document or something that can remedy the situation at hand. So when I'm in a management role, I try to stress that to the adjusters. And if I'm training somebody, I'm like, that's not giving you leeway to just, be too relaxed, but don't stress yourself out to where you think the sky is falling and you're going to get fired over something like that. Everybody makes mistakes. Mistakes can be corrected 9 times out of 10, I think.
Yes. That's why I like this area of law too. As I was saying earlier, I did a little bit of plaintiff's work and I was doing family law at the same time. And on one of my cases, it was not my error. It was actually the judge's error in the judge's order. My client ended up in jail for 72 hours. And I cried and cried and cried, but like, there was nothing I could have done about it. I got him out. Like, it was a Friday. I couldn't get him out till Monday morning. And after that, I was like, nope, going back to insurance.
It's not for you, huh? Okay.
I want fixable mistakes. I don't want my point. But he was very lighthearted about it. He said somebody gave him Kool-Aid from their commissary, and he saw some of his friends he hadn't seen in a while in there. So, he was all right with it. Whereas I was just a complete panic.
I'm a little more concerned that he saw a bunch of friends.
Right. Or that he made friends that quickly in jail.
But it was okay. It was okay. But fixable mistakes. Nobody's going to jail and getting Kool-Aid and making friends.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like this. I really do. I would say I like the first party property better than the liability and things like that. It's just, I don't know. I can do the liability, but I just like first party property. It's just a little more relaxed, I think.
Yeah. Well, with that, I know you have a hard stop, so I don't want to go over your hard stop. But before we close up, I want to ask you this. I asked this of pretty much every one of my guests. So, Rene, knowing what you know now throughout your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say, as an adjuster, I would say document. And, if you don't have it in your claim notes, then it did not happen. And also on that line, when you do document, make sure it's factual and do not put any of your opinions in there, because I always say pretend, and it very well could happen that someday that's on a big screen in front of a jury and a judge, and your notes are going to be in there. So don't put anything squirrely in there. Don't.
Yes.
Just be professional and factual and you'll be fine. But document everything and also be professional in the way you interact with others and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I saw a meme the other day that says dance like no one is watching, document like it's going to be read aloud in a deposition.
Absolutely.
Correct.
That's good. Yes. I'm going to use that. Yes.
Yes. Yes. It should be like your motto, really.
Yeah.
Well, Rene, it was such a pleasure chatting with you today. I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation and we were finally able to get it together.
Yes.
And I appreciate your time with us and, talking to us about first party property claims. I love hearing about it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Megan. Good to meet you, Jen.
Nice to meet you as well.
Okay.
Of course, thank you. And of course, to all our listeners out there, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform as well as YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Megan Henry.